Welcome to the VEROSCOPE analysis of the JonBenet Ramsey case, where John is, I believe, at a conference called CrimeCon, and he's going to be asked a question by an ex-FBI behavioral analysis unit agent called Jim Clemente. And we're going to be analyzing the responses from him. And we're going to be looking at whether or not we believe the responses to be true and whether or not we can find deception within them. So this is the report which we're going to be going back to after we've listened to the actual question. It's a short video, so it won't be a long VEROSCOPE analysis. But if you're new to the case, perhaps if you're looking from the UK, this is the couple, Patsy Ramsey and John Ramsey, whose daughter was tragically killed quite a few years ago now, quite a few decades ago now, and her name was JonBenet, and she was only 6 years old at the time. I've looked at some of their statements, some of this couple's statement. Patsy, by the way, has already passed away from cancer some years ago. But I've looked at their statements, and their denials are reliable, and it's my opinion that they themselves weren't involved in the actual crime of killing. They found a letter, a ransom note, which we're going to be analysing in another video. So if you're not subscribed to the channel and you'd like to see the ransom note analysis, please do subscribe or join as a member, where we go through together teaching and training on this style of analysis. So let's carry on with the actual video first, which will give us a reference point to begin. The FBI agent, or the ex-FBI agent rather, Jim Clemente, is about to ask John Ramsey a question.
Next.
John, I just want to start off by saying, on behalf of all the agents who investigated child abductions in the FBI, like myself, I want to offer you our sincere condolences.
Thank you.
And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I've certainly worked thousands of cases where unfortunately parents have lost children. Mm-hmm. But I have to ask, how can you explain the fact that there's never been another case where the daughter of a businessman has been targeted by kidnappers for ransom, and they left a extremely lengthy and confusing ransom note that was written on materials, with materials in the house, mm-hmm. But then instead of kidnapping your daughter, they actually, I'm sorry, but brutally murdered her, mm-hmm. Left the note and the body at the same location, in the same house. It's just never happened before. But what has happened before is tens of thousands of times in that same time period, there have been literally that many cases where somebody staged a crime scene to be something it was not.
You know, that's the police theory, that Burke hit his sister and killed her.
Burke is his son, and there have been many theories. If you know more about these theories, please do put them in the comments. I'm fairly new to this case myself, so that would be very interesting. But Burke had, I believe, accusations that he might have hurt his sister. And so that's where that question has come from.
And then we, to protect Burke, staged this whole strangulation, ransom note craziness. And that theory would not make good grade C crime fiction on television. It's absurd. The biggest flaw in that theory is that the coroner said the cause of death was strangulation and a severe blow to the head. And Paula can talk to that, I think.
And I talked to this coroner, and this is one of the most unpublicized facts of the case. Those in law enforcement who worked on the case simply ignored it. He said the cause, not causes, cause of death was a blow to the head and strangulation. And when I interviewed him, he said they happened as close to simultaneous as one could imagine. Additionally, she was tortured with sexual abuse. Go ahead, John.
Well, anyway,
Yeah, that phrase, well, anyway, after such a traumatic sentence that we heard from this lady Paula, is unusual. But let's backtrack a little bit before we carry on. He said that it's a theory and that Burke hit his sister and killed her. And then to protect Burke, they staged the whole strangulation ransom note craziness. So if you look carefully, there's no real specific denial in that sentence. He says, he begins the sentence with, you know, so he's bringing the audience into shared knowledge unnecessarily because the audience doesn't necessarily know. He also repeats the question from Jim Clemente, almost verbatim, which is unusual. And we have a principle in forensic linguistics that if you question the question or use another technique to buy cognitive time to think, then that in itself is a deceptive marker. He mentions the word craziness, doesn't he? And that minimizes the severity of the whole thing, in my opinion. We're talking about a murder and of his own child, JonBenet, and to start calling it craziness is inappropriate in many ways. So the language there isn't perfect. Let's have a look at some of this in some more detail. We mark up the document in certain ways using certain colors, or at least I do. If you have time to pause the video and look at these in more detail, please do feel welcome. So Jim says, I just want to start off saying, on behalf of all the agents who investigated child abductions in the FBI, like myself, I want to offer you our sincere condolences. So I think that's very fair of Jim to begin that way. And John says thank you. And Jim then asks the real question. And he says, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I've certainly worked thousands of cases where unfortunately parents have lost children. But I have to ask, how can you explain the fact that there's never been another case where the daughter of a businessman has been targeted by kidnappers for ransom, and they left an extremely lengthy and confusing ransom note that was written with materials in the house? But then instead of kidnapping your daughter, they actually, I'm sorry, but brutally murdered her, left the note and the body at the same location in the same house. It's just never happened before. But what has happened before is tens of thousands of times in that same time period. There has been literally that many cases where somebody staged a crime scene to be something it was not. So it is unusual, isn't it? The ransom note was in the house. JonBenet was found murdered in the house, and it's just highly unusual. So how does he answer? He says, you know, bringing us the audience in. That's the police theory, that Burke hit his sister and killed her. So some people might say that this is an embedded confession. And then we, meaning Patsy and I, to protect Burke, stage this whole strangulation ransom note craziness. So the question was complicated and confusing, and so therefore we have to take into account that the question isn't a clean question, which is what we prefer in forensic linguistics and statement analysis, discourse analysis. However, the question is the question. So when parroting reveals processing failure, what John does next is extraordinary in forensic linguistics. He repeats the entire accusation virtually verbatim instead of rejecting it. So there's no reliable denial. This reveals cognitive overload when processing accusations of staging his daughter's murder. He also goes in, because it's many years later at a crime convention, so he also goes into a learnt and repeated pattern. So what does he actually say? He goes on to say, you know that's the police theory, that Burke hit his sister and killed her. And then we, to protect Burke, staged this whole strangulation ransom note craziness. And that. And for those who have been learning forensic linguistics with VEROSCOPE, we know that this is highly sensitive. So here we mark it in pink, repetition, same words, close together, extreme psychological sensitivity. And that theory would not make good grade C crime fiction on television. So the triple that, and also calling it grade C crime fiction is minimization. Again, just like I mentioned before, so this reduces what's happened to JonBenet to an entertainment quality type of assessment. So it's wrong. And the television reference is unnecessary language. It's an unnecessary comparison as well. So here we are. John repeats the entire accusation almost word for word, an extraordinary response that reveals massive cognitive disruption. Most innocent people would interrupt and say, no, that's not what happened. And they would reject the accusation. That's completely wrong, or they might reframe. The real facts are. Instead, John's brain needs to repeat the complex accusation exactly to process it. And the repetitive stuttering, that. Normally when we see this pattern, whether it's I, or in this case, that, what normally follows, percentage-wise, is deceptive. And it shows speech breakdown as he struggles to come up with what he says. Okay, I think we should carry on with the video and hear the next bit.
To answer your question, I can't explain the criminal mind. There was a case about 9 months later near our home in Boulder.
By the way, he didn't answer the question, and the question was nothing about the criminal mind. So this is a sleight of hand, a technique. Politicians often use this technique to avoid the actual question and hope the audience forgets because of the complexity of the question, perhaps, and partly because of their answer being complex. And then they reintroduce what the question wasn't about and pretend to answer that.
The parents had gone out for dinner, came home, put their daughter to bed, and thankfully it set the alarm on their house. And thankfully they heard a noise in their daughter's bedroom. The father went in, there was a man standing over his daughter, and he got out, he escaped. And our feeling was it's a very similar circumstance to ours. The police said, well, it's different because the daughter wasn't killed. Well, thankfully she wasn't killed. The father was able to interrupt that. But the point is that I believe the killer was in the house when we got home from dinner with friends. We went to bed, went to sleep. He was there for hours, I'm sure, waiting for us to fall asleep. Wrote the ransom note before abducting or killing JonBenet. John Douglas, who is probably a preeminent profiler, said no criminal could have written that note after such a horrible crime. So it was written beforehand, and I believe that's probably right.
Yeah. Okay. So before I forget, I need to thank a channel, an excellent channel, by the way. Please do go and visit it. It's called True Crime Rocket Science. They've got wonderful documentary style videos, and this crime conference video, he has a number of these on there as well. So please go and look at those. So let's quickly analyze what we've just heard. He says, well, anyway, to answer your question, I can't explain their criminal mind. Well, anyway, that's especially after what we heard from Paula, the lady. It's dismissive, it's deflection language, it's moving away from the previous topic, which he did not like, which I won't mention again. You can rewind it and hear it again if you wish, but the claims, he wanted to move away from that claim as quickly as possible. So he says, well, anyway, which is unusual and deceptive, because he wants to move away from that fact. He wants to take some of her facts, but not the inconvenient facts. Then to answer your question, which is a false commitment because he doesn't actually answer the question. In fact, he changes it to their criminal mind, which wasn't the question at all. And why reference the psychology of the mind rather than the actions, which was the real question? You know, the ransom note, finding his daughter in the same house as the ransom note, etc. So he can't explain, so he changes the question in an attempt to explain. He then uses a case. I don't know whether he just has made up the case in his mind, but he says, he begins storytelling. He says, there was a case about 9 months ago, he says, near our home. Let's go into the actual analysis itself. I do apologize. I was talking without going back to here. So, although I've heard a reliable denial about were Patsy and he involved in the killing, and I believe that they weren't, we haven't heard a reliable denial for this question. There was no personal pronoun I, there was no past tense I did not or I didn't, and there was no stage or cover up or write the ransom note. Instead, he avoided the denial. And this is a very common pattern because people don't like to lie blatantly. So most lies are through avoidance rather than outright commission, rather than a blatant lie, which you can get caught in. So it's omission rather than commission. The lady Paula, I believe, let's listen to what she said. And I talked to this coroner, and this is one of the most unpublicized facts of the case. Those in law enforcement who worked on the case simply ignored it. He said the cause, not causes, cause of death was a blow to the head and strangulation. And when I interviewed him, he said they happened as close to simultaneous as one could imagine. Additionally, and then she goes on to talk about this, which I won't mention on the video for reasons that I don't want the video to be slowed down by the algorithm. So she does inject inflammatory content. She claims law enforcement ignored the facts. She corrects the cause to causes. There's some editing under stress. Slight grandiose claims of exclusive coroner access. Okay, I suspect we might have this because she might be the host of the actual convention and conference and perhaps extremely connected. That would explain this type of confidence. And it could be true, but we just note what she said, basically. So, and then the deflection response. He says, well, anyway. I didn't like that, especially in answer to this. Go ahead, John, and then, well, anyway. Do you see what I mean? It's distasteful, isn't it? It's dismissive about something just so awful that the dismissal and wanting to distance and misdirect doesn't sit well. To answer your question, I can't explain their criminal mind. There was a case, and now he goes into the storytelling. I imagine he's told this story before. It's a way of deflecting and distancing, and to some degree, this is a technique that people use in gaslighting as well. They go into the storytelling, which has nothing to do with the question. There was a case about 9 months later near our home. So this then brings the home. He's also hoping that you'll fill in the blanks and possibly then assume that the potential kidnapper and murderer is the same person. That's what he's attempting to do. There was a case 9 months later near our home in Boulder. The parents had gone out for dinner, came home, put their daughter to bed, and thankfully it set the alarm on their house. So here we have cognitive overload and a nonsensical sentence. It set the house. So it's passive language. What set the house? It. Well, it doesn't exist, does it? So this makes me wonder, is the whole thing a fabrication? And thankfully, they heard a noise in their daughter's bedroom. All right. So he wants us to believe that it set the alarm on their house, and thankfully they heard a noise in their daughter's bedroom. Do you see? He's hoping that we will assume that the alarm went off, but the alarm didn't go off in this fabrication. Instead, the parents heard a noise in the daughter's bedroom, not the alarm going off in the house. Do you see? The father went in. There was a man standing over his daughter, and he got out. He escaped, and John escapes the actual entire paragraph as well. Standing over. So we look at body positions, and I don't believe this. I believe this is just a rehearsed story as a learned technique to avoid the question. So he's changed the question to their criminal mind. He says, anyway, to answer your question, and we all heard the question, I can't explain their criminal mind. It's nothing to do with their criminal mind. And then he doesn't, because he can't, he says, and then launches into a pre-prepared story, hoping that some people in the audience will then assume, oh, well, that must be the kidnapper. So it's a technique, and therefore it's deceptive, in my opinion, obviously. So, well, anyway, immediately distances from the woman's inflammatory claims of this. John doesn't address Clemente's statistical impossibility argument, instead deflecting to unknowledgeable perpetrator psychology, their criminal mind. The Boulder case contains a logical impossibility. If the alarm was set, how did parents hear an intruder directly? The alarm should have triggered upon entry. John constructs a fictional, again my opinion, a fictional scenario with impossible elements to support his intruder narrative. The repeated thankfully emphasizes what didn't happen rather than what did, showing sensitivity around victim outcomes. So he then says, and I are, so we have a change of pronoun, which we note in go the deceptive flags. By the way, deceptive flags by themselves don't mean anything per se. So we look for clusters and superclusters of these flags. And when we have enough clusters and superclusters, we might determine that overall the statement is deceptive. But something that's very, very important to bear in mind and to learn. Just because a statement is deceptive, it doesn't necessarily mean the person is guilty. The statement might come across as deceptive for all sorts of reasons other than guilt. It might be as simple as they know who is guilty, as an example. Or they feel guilt for another reason, like having been out for dinner that night. So deception, being detected, doesn't automatically lead to guilt. And it's something that we really have to keep at the forefront of our own minds so that we don't start to become biased or have cognitive dissonance ourselves. It's very important that. It then goes on, or rather he goes on. And I are, feeling was its a very similar circumstance to ours. Okay, so he can't commit that it was a similar circumstance because I believe it's the story's a fabrication anyway. And I are feeling. So he could have said it was a very similar circumstance to ours, but he won't commit to that. So he says, I are feeling was. Do you see? Forensic linguistics is a fascinating subject. If I look at this statement again in a week or two, or you look at this statement again in a week or two, you'll see more and more. That's the wonderful thing. It goes deeper and deeper. Ah, the police said, well, it's different because the daughter wasn't killed. Well, thankfully, which is a repeated word, so it's sensitive, she wasn't killed. The father was able to interrupt that because he caught the man in the bedroom who was standing over, but he managed to escape. Must have jumped out the window or something. And it's because he heard a noise in the bedroom, not the alarm going off, which I wanted you to think was happening. Do you see? And this is just such a tiny, tiny few paragraphs. So this shows the power of statement analysis, because even just in a few paragraphs, we can start to see an awful lot. We went to bed. Dropped pronoun. When we see a dropped pronoun in a statement, the person is potentially psychologically removing themselves from the statement, from the commitment. They don't want to commit a blatant lie psychologically or unconsciously. So very often we'll see pronouns dropped. Pronouns are very reliable, by the way, the most reliable unconscious linguistics there are. Went sleep, not I went to sleep, but rather went sleep. He was there for hours, I'm sure. So whoever the kidnappers were, and when we analyze when we analyze the ransom note later, apparently the kidnappers were a small foreign faction. So this small foreign faction of kidnappers has become he. He was there for hours, I'm sure, waiting for us to fall asleep. So the kidnapper is there in John's house, waiting for them to fall asleep. And then wrote the ransom note before, excuse me for the transcript error, abducting or killing JonBenet. So, watch the critical moment. We went to bed. Missing I went sleep. Abduct. Ah, that's what it is. It's not a transcript error. I do apologize. He said, abduct, and then self-censors. Abduct, abducting or killing. Okay. And then he goes on to say, another pre-prepared story. John Douglas, who is then some self-censorship, probably a preeminent profiler, said no criminal could have written that note after such a horrible crime. So it was written beforehand. And I believe that's probably right. Probably being sensitive, giving less weight to the sentence, with the double I normally indicating what comes after this cognitive error is likely to be deceptive. So, I think deception is indicated in this very short answer to the singular question, although it wasn't a clean question. Deception is indicated. Okay, so if you have time to read these or you want to slow the video down, please do. But essentially, this will be running through most of the points that I've made or some that I've forgotten, which we processed when we first did the analysis. There's just over 60 deceptive markers. Okay, so there we are. That brings us to the end of this analysis. Please do follow the channel or consider joining the channel. There are 2 levels of membership, and in the higher tier, we are going through in far more detail and learning more about this FBI style of analysis, and together going through cases and really building our skills. So I look forward to either reading your comments and answering your comments, or hopefully do subscribe, or I'll see you in the membership area. Okay, have a wonderful day.